What is up, YouTube? Before I get into the video, let me remind you, if you like my videos, hit that like and subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when the videos hit the interwebs, hit the bell icon. And finally, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. Okay, so a while back, I want to say several months ago, it might be less, might be more, I did a deck tech on Melek Is It Paragon, and in the deck tech I kind of went on to explain that I was pretty disappointed with the build. It wasn't doing anything, or at least it wasn't doing what I needed it to do, and it was just a very disappointing deck to play. And at some point in time, one of my buddies in one of my commander groups happened to cross the video, saw that, and started looking at the deck list and pointed out to me that I had all the payoffs for a interesting Is It Spellslinger deck, but not enough of the fuel, if you will, for that fire. So with this person's help, I redesigned the deck, took a lot of suggestions there. And now we're going to take a look at what Melek Is It Paragon looks like in its new iteration. I have had a chance to play test this quite a few times and played a couple games with it, and it is significantly better. It runs. And that's the important part here, is that it was not disappointing to play. Some really big things here. I'm not going to go through the trouble of picking out all the cards that I took out of here and then showing what replacements I put in here, because we did such a significant rework on this. I can just do a whole new deck tech for it. And you'll see it as we go through. There's significantly less creatures in here. There's significantly less enchantments in here. There's significantly more instants and sorceries. And these instants and sorceries are more geared toward a very specific idea. So without further ado, let's jump in. Melek Is It Paragon is 4, a blue and a red for a 2/4. You play with the top card of your library revealed, and you may cast the top card of your library if it's an instant or sorcery card, and if you would cast it, an instant or sorcery spell from your library, so on top of it, you get to copy it and choose new targets for the copy. That's a fantastic ability on its own. Melek being 6 cost is a little bit hard, but we'll get into it when we get into it. Okay, so for starters, we're going to look at the creatures, and like I said, there's significantly less creatures in here than there were before. So we basically cut out a large portion of the creatures that kind of took up, I guess, slots that you would rather pay 2 or 3 or 4 for another spell. So starters, we have Archmage Emeritus. This one is just too good in this deck. Every time you cast or copy a spell, you get to draw a card, and we're casting and copying a significant amount of times. So this is going to see a lot of card draw. Next up, we have Barrel, Chief of Compliance. We have a lot of counter magic in here, but the biggest part of this is the instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast. So this really helps to bring the instants and sorceries down to either 1 or 2 mana, and it's usually colored pips. But if you do cast a counter magic spell, you get to draw a card and discard a card. We still keep the Goblin Electromancer for the same reason. Instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast. The more mana that we have up to cast more cards, the better, because there is going to be a point in time where you're going to want to start keeping track of your storm count. We keep the Gutter Snipe because, again, Gutter Snipe is exactly what this deck is looking for. When we cast instant and sorcery spells, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent, so we can potentially deal a lot of damage to each opponent at the table, making us a huge threat with just a tiny little 2/2 for 3. We have Niv-Mizzet Perrin, again, keeping this one, 6 cost, 3 blue, 3 red for a 5/5, can't be countered, has flying. Whenever you draw a card, it deals 1 damage to any target, and the best part here is whenever you play an instant or sorcery spell, you get to draw a card. So we're going to see a lot of that. If you have this in play when you start getting into the big storm counts, this thing is going to start just destroying your opponents and getting tons of card draw. Next up we have Stormkiln Artist. Stormkiln Artist is a staple in any Spellslinger that has red in it. It creates treasures every time you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, which is incredible in this deck. And then it gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. That can actually get pretty significant. Despite the fact that it doesn't have trample, there are ways to give it trample. So this is actually a pretty... Unless I took them out. I might have taken them out. Don't quote me on that one. Might have taken them out. But either way, it gives you a lot of treasure tokens. And you can dump those treasure tokens into X spells. And since we are going to be building up for this whole idea of casting a really ridiculous X spell, hey, more treasures, the merrier. Then we have Tolerant Sky Summoner, 2 and 2 blue for a 2/2. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get a 2/2 Drake with flying. So, worst case scenario, we can create a flying army, and if we can't manage to kill all 3 players, we could kill 2 of them and use the flying army to kill the last one. It's just a nice backup plan. Plus, you just get so much value out of this. Next up, we have Veyron, Voice of Duality. This is 1 and a blue and a red for a 2/2. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Veyron gets +1/+1 until end of turn. If casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So Melek is going to be... this is going to see Melek's triggered ability and trigger it again, not to mention Gutter Snipe and a ton of other cards in here. So this is kind of really deadly in this deck. And then I believe finally we have Young Pyromancer for the same reason we have Tolerant. This is just a 2-mana 2/1. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you get a 1/1 red elemental creature token. So you could go for the swing wide strategy if you needed to. But more importantly, it does throw a lot of blockers out there, so you can use them as chump fodder and just in general keeping yourself defended. Okay, so that's our creatures. We're going to move into instants next. And like I said, there's a significant amount more of each of the instants and sorceries in this deck. So this is going to be a big trip through. That's a lot. Okay. So this is our instants. This is how many we have. You can see we have quite a few. In the previous iteration of this deck, we didn't necessarily have a small amount, but we certainly didn't have quite as much. Starting with big score, this is 4. As an additional cost, you have to discard a card, but you get to draw 2 cards and create 2 treasures. The beauty of this is copying a card is not casting it. So this as an additional cost to cast this spell only applies to cast the first time you cast it. Every copy after that only sees this text. It will not see the additional cost because you're not casting it at that point. You're copying it. So it's really important you understand that because you can get a huge amount of value out of this for discarding 1 single card. Then we have Brainstorm. Pretty simple. Draw 3, put 2 back. The 2 that you put back don't have to be part of the 3 that you drew. Beautiful card. 1 mana. You can't go wrong with this. We got Chaos Warp. This is a great way of destroying, or well, not destroying, but getting rid of permanents you don't want on the table. There is a small chance that you end up seeing the same permanent again if things shuffled that way. But really, 9 times out of 10, you end up getting rid of something really oppressive to get something that's not so bad. It's even better if they hit a land. And if you happen to have 1,000-Year Storm in play and a storm count going, this can hit multiple targets. We've got Comet Storm. This is going to be the first of the X spells that we start in. So all the X spells in here are designed to hit players except for one of them, I believe. Comet Storm says X and 2 red, multi-kicker 1, choose any target, then choose another target for each time this spell is cast, deal X damage to each of them. So essentially, point it at somebody's head. If you have a storm count going and a 1,000-Year Storm in play, this just multiplies and it becomes deadly. Next up, we have Consider, another 1 blue draw spell. This one allows you to look at the top card of your library, and you can put it into your graveyard if you want, and then you draw a card. Then we have Counterspell. Pretty simple. Like I said in many videos before, the only thing better than this is a mana drain. Next up, we have Psych Rift, and this is beautiful in this deck because you can overload this, but I have been in a position where I have cast this for 1 and a blue and still managed to bounce every non-land permanent that I didn't control, just simply because I had the 1,000-Year Storm in play and a high enough storm count. So this has two incredible functions in this deck, and you can't go wrong with it. Next up, we have Expansion Explosion. This has a double use in here because, typically speaking, when you have one of these dual cards in here, usually you're focused on one specific side. But since this one actually has two very viable sides in this deck specifically, you could cast it for either one. For Expansion, you can just outright copy a spell that costs 4 or less. And that is exactly what this deck is trying to do. 90% of the spells in here are going to cost 4 or less. So this is a great card to have in here. But the Explosion is even better because we're going to deal X damage to any target, and then target player draws X cards. Now, what that basically means is you could potentially get a huge amount of mana, dump it in here, and deal enough damage to not only kill one player, but also have enough mana dumped into it to draw another player out. And if not, you give yourself an opportunity to draw a whole bunch of cards. Next up, we have Expedite. This is one of the last of the cantrips that was left in here that I think was just like very specifically a cantrip. For 1 red, target creature gains haste, and you draw a card. That's really good in this deck. So this got actually kept over certain cards that gave First Strike, certain cards that gave Trample, and other things like that, because the haste is so important in this deck that it was worth keeping in here. So we have Expedite, 1 red, target creature gains haste until end of turn, and you get to draw a card. Next up, we have Fact or Fiction. Pretty simple. Draw 5, or reveal 5. Hand them to a player. That player separates them into 2 piles. You choose one. The other goes into your graveyard. In here, again, this is actually really phenomenal because if you have a good storm count, you could do this multiple times, and it's a brain burner for your opponents. Next up, we have Frantic Search. There's 2 reasons this is in here. First off, it untaps up to 3 lands when it resolves, and secondly, you get to draw 2 and discard 2. So you basically are looting to find what you actually need versus what you just don't need. But the other beauty about this is that it goes practically infinite with anything, and specifically in here, it'll go infinite with Melek and Thousand Year Storm and a couple other combination of cards in here. It isn't the only card in here that I use that untaps lands, but it is just as effective. The untapping of lands is seen by the copies as well. So even though you didn't tap lands to cast the copies will still use that ability. So you can just start superfluously floating mana, which just means extra value to your X spells. Next up, we have Galvanic Iteration. It copies the next instant or sorcery spell, and you can flash it back. So, I mean, I don't see a downside to this. Next up is Impulse, because Impulse is just good, and while it may have been errated many, many years ago to get rid of the whole shuffle your deck afterward thing, it's still a fantastic card. Look at the top 4, keep 1, put the rest on the bottom of your library. Really simple. But for 2 mana, and if you have one of the mana reducers, it could be just 1 blue. You get a great way to start sifting through your deck looking for exactly what you need. Increasing Vengeance. For 2 red, you can copy a spell, but if you flash it back, you can actually copy that spell twice. Again, I love the fact that it flashes back. I love the fact that when it flashes back, it's actually even more potent. It's just a good card. Next we have Is It Charm. Is It Charm has a lot of versatility in this deck. Counter target non-creature spell, deal 2 damage to any target, or sorry, to target creature, my bad, or draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. For 1 blue and 1 red, you get to choose one of those options. And again, with a nice storm count, you might be able to choose all 3 options. Who knows? You could go ham with this card, depending on how big your storm count is. So just a really versatile card. Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt's easy. 1 red, it deals 3 damage. With a storm count and a 1,000-year storm, this thing could potentially win the game for you. I chose this over Grape Shot. Grape Shot is probably outright deadlier, and I might have to find a way to work Grape Shot into here, and that might end up being in place of the Lightning Bolt. But Grape Shot is very cool because Grape Shot has Storm and then will also be seen by 1,000-year storm, so it'll storm a whole bunch and get really ugly. But yes, it will end games. Next up, we have Mystical Tutor. This is in here for obvious reasons. Where for 1 blue, you get to search for any instant or sorcery, right? Any instant? Yeah, any instant or sorcery. Reveal it, put it on top of your library, and set yourself up. The beauty of it is, if you have Melek in play, you can, as soon as you put that on top, you can use Melek to cast it, and Melek will copy it, and things just start going crazy from there. Next we have Negate, great way to get rid of non-creature spells for 2, just really efficient. We have Opt, another 1 blue cantrip spell for scrying. You get to scry 1 cantrip, basically. Next up we have Seething Song. For 2 and a red, you get 5 red mana into your mana pool. And again, when this storms, it's just a whole lot of red mana to your mana pool, and that is perfect for this deck to start just casting things obnoxiously. Next up we have Snap, another one of those where it untaps lands. Return target creature to its owner's hand and then untap lands. This can be very good. It can be a lot like a Cyclonic Rift, except only hits creatures. But on top of that, it allows you to float a whole bunch of mana, so you can't go wrong with this. Next we have Telling Time. For 1 and a blue, you get to look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand, 1 on the bottom of your library, and 1 on top of your library. And this is a great way to set up, first off, getting a card in your hand, but second off, getting that card on top if Melek is in play so that you can play it. Next we have Thought Scour, another 1 blue cantrip. Target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. And this can also be a game ender, because if you have a high enough storm count, you could start decking your opponents with this. Thrill of Possibility, another one of those as an additional cost, discard a card, draw spells. For 1 and a red, you get to draw 2 cards. You only ever have to discard for the first time. Everything else is a copy, and copies are not cast, so you do not discard the card for that. And so you can just get obnoxious amounts of value from just discarding 1 card. And then I believe finally we have Turnabout. For 2 and 2 blue, you choose artifact, creature, or land. Tap all permanents of the chosen type target player controls, or untap all permanents of the chosen type. So again, this is in here to help us untap our lands. And again, with a high enough storm count, this can actually untap our lands a lot. And so we can float a lot of mana into our mana pool. Next, we're going to take a look at sorceries. I believe there was more sorceries than instants, but only barely. Oh, I might be wrong. Might be wrong. So this is the number of sorceries. There's quite a few in here as well. We're going to start with Blast Act. Board wipes are necessary because we don't have a lot of creatures and we don't have a lot of way of defending ourselves. So if things start to get really crazy and out of control, the board wipes are here to help us kind of keep things under control. So Blasphemous Act, we have bonus round for 1 and 2 red until end of turn. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, that player copies it and chooses new targets. So unlike the other copy spells that we have in here that only see 1, this one sees the entire turn until end of turn. Every spell cast is going to get copied, and you literally cannot go wrong with that in this deck. Next we have Cathartic Reunion. Again, another one of those where you're going to discard 2 cards, but you're going to draw 3 cards. And again, you only ever do that for the first one. Every copy you do not have to discard 2. So you get an insane amount of value, and all you had to do was discard 2 cards. Next we have Crackle with Power. Crackle with Power is going to be a game ender. You are either going to dump an obscene amount of mana into it, or you are going to copy it an obscene amount of times. Either way, you are going to do a massive amount of damage to multiple targets. This card is an absolute must-have in this deck. Next up, we have Culmination of Studies. This is, again, right up there with the Crackle of Power or the Meteor Storm. The big part about this one is that you don't have to commit a huge amount to this one. So you exile the top X cards of your library. For each land card exiled this way, create a treasure token. For each blue card exiled this way, draw a card. For each red card exiled this way, Culmination of Study deals 1 damage to each opponent. So really what we're trying to do here is get a little bit of value to close up the gap. You don't want to cast this early because you might actually hurt yourself doing that. But If you do it later when everyone's at lower life, this is a great way to just shut out the game at that point. Next up, we have Epic Experiment. For X, a blue, and a red, you get to exile top X cards of your library. You can cast instant and sorcery spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. Then put all the exiled cards this way that weren't cast into your graveyard. This is an excellent way to get a huge storm count in the game. And it's just also just a really good spell to cast a whole bunch of extra spells. You can't go wrong with this. Got Faithless Looting for 1 red, draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, has flashback for 2 and a red. This one, unfortunately, if it gets copied, you still have to discard the 2 cards because it's not as an additional cost. Then we have Immolating Gyre. This is going to be another board wipe type of thing. It sees the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, and it deals X damage to each creature and planeswalker you don't control. So it's a one-sided board wipe. And it is relatively effective in this deck. We have Jessica's Will. Jessica's Will with Melek on board is a lot of mana and a lot of cards being exiled, especially again with the 1,000-Year Storm, Storm Count, so on and so forth. This can get really deadly really fast. We have Mana Geyser, 1 red for each tap land your opponents control. Again, a fantastic way to flood your mana pool with a ton of mana, and copies are just fantastic with this. We have Mystic's Mastery. Mystic's Mastery is a great way to pull yourself out of a stuck position. If you have a ton of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, you can use Mystic's Mastery to copy all of those and start drawing a whole bunch of cards and dealing a whole bunch of damage, but also specifically digging for something that will allow you to shut out the game. We have Overmaster for 1 red. This is cantrip. The next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn can't be countered. This is really important because as you start to show your colors, people are going to start being wary with you. If you cast this multiple times, it's going to see multiple spells being cast. Or is it the next? Oh, well, I guess that's not going to work out. But either way, it at least protects one of your spells. So you cast this, then you follow it up with probably the game-ending spell, and your opponents can't do anything about it. And it's a cantrip. We got Past in Flames. Another similar thing to Mystic's Mastery, only this time it just gives flashback to everything in your graveyard. And most importantly, it also has flashback, so you can just do it again next time you have a big graveyard of instants and sorceries. We got Ponder, another 1 blue cantrip. Look at the top 3 cards, put them back in any order. You may shuffle your library, and you get to draw a card. So if all of them are boo-boo, you just shuffle your library and hope for a good top card. If not, you can set up the top card to be something Melek will see and copy. Just perfect. Got Preordain, another 1 blue cantrip in here. Scry 2, then draw a card. Pretty simple. Got See the Truth for 1 and a blue. This card is fantastic in here. If you cast it from your hand, it just sees, the top 3 cards, and you get to choose one to put in your hand. If you actually cast it from anywhere but your hand, you get to keep all the cards that you see. So it's basically drawing 3 cards for 2. And there are tons of ways to cast this either from the top of your library or from your graveyard that See the Truth will see and allow you to keep all the cards you drew. Next we have Seize the Spoils, another one of those as an additional cost. Discard a card and then you get some effect from it. In this case you get to draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. You only have to pay that additional cost 1 time. All the copies will just give you value. Next up we have Serum Visions, the OG 1 blue. I guess that's not true. I guess the OG 1 blue was Ancestral Recall, but the OG 1 blue cantrip, draw a card, scry 2. Pretty simple. We have Tormenting Voice, 1 in a red, as an additional cost to cast the spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards. I've already talked about the value a billion times on these. You can't go wrong with copies on these. And then finally we have Vandal Blast. And Vandal Blast is going to work very similar to Cyclonic Rift in that the later the game goes on, the less you have to cast this for the overload cost. If it's earlier in the game, hey, go for the overload cost. But by the time it gets late in the game, you're probably going to be able to cast this and destroy all things that aren't yours anyway, just because you have a high storm count. Right, we're going to take a look at artifacts. There was some differences in the artifacts. Most of the artifacts that you're going to see are stuff that was already in here, but you're going to notice a lack of certain things, like, for instance, Isochron Scepter is no longer in here, because Isochron Scepter is actually, ironically, just too slow in this deck. We have Arcane Signet, Mana Rock, Izzet Signet, Mana Rock, Mind Stone, Mana Rock, Sensi's Divining Top to help us make sure we get the Melek triggers that are most optimal. Then we have Soul Ring, Mana Rock. We have Talisman of Creativity, another Mana Rock. And then we have Twinning Staff, because Twinning Staff just sees copies and makes more copies. And yeah, you can't go wrong with that synergy. More importantly, for 7 and you can tap it, you get to copy a target instant or sorcery spell. Like, it just feeds itself. That's very cool. And finally, well, and I guess not finally. Next up, we're going to look at enchantments. This is where the biggest changes were made. So we went from, I believe, 7, maybe more enchantments to 3. And they are very specific enchantments. Starting with Arcane Bombardment. Because Arcane Bombardment, as the game goes on, if this stays in play, it gets really obnoxious. We're going to see a ton of spells get exiled by it, and every time you cast a spell, it's going to cast all of those spells for free, which is phenomenal. We got Jace's Sanctum. Again, another one of those instant sorcery spell reducing cards. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to scry one. So we can help, again, just keep setting up, either setting up for the Melek or setting up to get a card that you need versus one that you might not need. Jace's Sanctum does cost 4, but as far as like setup enchantments are concerned, I would say I still think this is very valuable in the deck. And then finally we have Thousand Year Storm, which is kind of the linchpin of the deck. You're not going to cast this unless you know that you are either going to win the game or get very close, and you know that you can keep it protected should you not win the game. And basically, whenever you cast a spell, you copy that spell for each other spell that has been cast that turn. Super good. Melek is going to really help with that by casting things from the top of the library and copying, making copies of those. Twinning Staff in play is going to make it even worse. This is just a fantastic card in this deck, and it kind of is the reason why I call it Melek Storm. And finally we have Planeswalker. The Planeswalker didn't change. We have Ral Storm Conduit, because whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Ral deals 1 damage to target opponent or Planeswalker. So you can kill Planeswalkers with him, you can kill opponents with him. You're going to be casting spells anyway, so why not? For 2 you can scry, so we can set up for Melek, and for -2 you can cast it. Whenever you cast your next instant or sorcery spell, you get to copy it. Super good. Alright. Land-based changed almost not at all, but we'll go through the land-based anyway, because there was one change in here for sure in the non-basics. So let's just bring those up here. We have Command Tower, which is, you know, pretty normal. We have Evolving Wilds. We have Fabled Passage. We have Izzet Boiler Works. We have Molten Tributary. So this is a card that I put in here in place of Swiftwater Cliffs, because this has basic land typings, and so fetch lands can see that. If you already have your shock land, this is the next card you would want to fetch for. We got, or I guess, Mystic Sanctuary. Mystic Sanctuary, because if you have 3 or more other islands in play, this guy comes into play untapped, and if it does, you get to return an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to the top of your library. And the fact that it goes on top of your library, in most cases, kind of sucks. But in the case of Melek, that's really good. We can literally put whatever we want on top and then cast it, because Melek is cool. Reliquary Tower, because you're going to need it. You're going to have, at some point in time, a massive hand, and you're probably going to end up discarding a lot of cards, because this is the only card that I know of that's in this deck that reduces your hand size to, or that takes away your hand size. We got Scalding Tarn, fetch land. Got Shivan Reef, pain land. Steam Vents, shock land. Stormcarved Coast, check land. Sulphur Falls, another check land. And then finally, Temple of Epiphany, a scry land. And again, these lands, for the most part, except for the Molten Tributary, were already in there. And I don't believe I changed the land count on the islands or mountains, but we'll go through it one more time just in case. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 islands. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 mountains. All right, so that is the new Is It. Sorry, I keep calling him Is It as if like he's not named. This is the new Melek Is It Paragon deck. And again, the whole thing here is you're going to spend the first part of the game kind of doing the setup. You're going to use your cards to draw cards so you can find things like the Jace's Sanctum, Barrel, Electromancer, stuff like that to decrease the cost of your instants and sorceries. Not to mention that decreasing the cost for an X spell just gives an extra 1 mana to it. And then you want to set up for the late game, so at some point in time you want to get that 1,000-Year Storm in, create a huge storm count, and then probably Crackle with Fire or Crackle with Power or something that's just going to break into a whole bunch of really big obnoxious X damage spells and kill the entire table. As I said, I've had a chance to playtest this a couple times. I've actually had a chance to play against people with it, I think 3 times, and 2 of those 3 times it won. 1 time people caught on to what I was doing and knew that I needed to be taken out. But at that particular time, I was absolutely the threat. So this definitely went from being a deck that just wasn't functioning. It was just not working out at all. And it evolved into a deck that is just insanely powerful, and you have to be careful when you play against it. So that is it. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below, but keep it positive. I will remove negative comments because there's no need for that. And yeah, until next time, guys.